Hello, everybody. I am joined by the wonderful Marissa Garza. Marissa, how are you?
Hi, Felipe. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Of course, I'm so excited to have you. I would describe you as one of the most intelligent people in the state of Illinois, but also the planet Earth.
Oh boy.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
so excited that you're here. Marissa, for those that might not know you yet,
Mhm.
hopefully today
Mhm.
they will change that. Do you want to introduce yourself and like what your background is in terms of like covering film and TV as a television and film consumer, and also as
Yeah.
someone from the Latine community?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Marissa Garza. I am from the land of Chicago, not Chicago proper, but the land of.
The suburbs.
Um, yes. Yeah. Chicago
That's
land.
when I moved out here to LA, people are like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "I just say Boston because it's easy." And then if someone's from Massachusetts, then they're like, "Which
Yes.
part?" And yes.
But there's like a whole thing here in Chicago. Like, I can't say that I'm from Chicago because I'm not really from Chicago. It's like this whole thing. So, Chicagoland, I'm from Chicagoland. Um, and I have been watching TV pretty much since I was born, but I've been covering and analyzing TV for post show recaps. Most recently, in the past year, I've covered things like Wednesday, Cobra Kai, currently covering You. It really allows me to have like a community experience with watching television. And I always got in trouble when I was a kid for watching too much TV and then talking about it too much. So now that I get to do that, it kind of works out for me.
Yeah, no,
um,
but that's very relatable in terms of like my parents. Like there was always a different phase of my life where my mom was like, "Why are you watching this?" And like as I grew up, it would change to a different show. But like I've always been in love with television, and I can tell just based on like our experiences in the community of post show recaps that you very much are similar.
yeah, I see television as like community storytelling, and it's fun to share stories with people. So push recaps gives me a great place to do that, and the internet at large. But it's nice
Yeah.
to have a little corner of it there. In terms of my involvement in the Latine community, I am half Mexican. My dad's side, my dad is Mexican, my mom is Polish. So one of the things that I have always had trouble with is kind of like identifying with my Latine side. It's definitely like a calling within me, but one of the things that I've experienced is I don't fit fully in one group or the other. So it's actually like television and media that's really my gateway to exploring that part of my identity.
Yeah, no, I can empathize with you very much because if you're from Chicagoland, I'm assuming the suburbs were probably a little bit more white than Chicago itself, similar to Boston. I grew up in a suburb, pretty white suburb, and I often had a hard time figuring out my own identity because I'm very white passing. I also have
Yep.
like Middle Eastern, Brazilian culture in me. My grandfather side of the family is Lebanese, and they were immigrants to Brazil. So it's like this whole like I don't know how to identify. And TV sometimes was the first introduction to some of these concepts that are foundational to who I am as a Latino here, especially now that I'm out in Los Angeles pursuing a career in film and TV. So I feel like we have a lot of similarities, but also we have different stories, which is why I'm excited to talk to you. And also, let me just say, you are one of the trailblazers in the Jenna Ortega cinematic universe, and she
Yeah,
is one of the Latinas to watch these days,
she is.
covering Wednesday and you. So I'm
Well,
excited
we're
to
like
see
best
her
friends at
career
this
evolve.
point, right?
Yes, we love Jenna Ortega in this house. Excited for Scream 6. I think that's her next project that's coming out. So I'm excited to see this young Latina trailblazer who's also like super supportive of her community based on everything that I've read about her. She's like super um, in it with us in terms of like looking for progress and trying to see more Latino stories on
Mhm.
screen. But Marissa,
Mhm.
you've talked about your background with like the coverage and also your background in terms of being Mexican. But do you have a Sorry, words can be hard sometimes. Do you have
Of course.
a recollection of the first time you resonated with like a story because of the background of a character or because of the content of the story
Mm.
because it was Latine or Hispanic or maybe even the inverse? Do you have a recollection of the time that you really struggled to identify with a character that many of your peers might have been connecting with because you felt a dissonance with them.
Mm. Yeah, I think for me, one of my first memories of, again, searching for my identity through media, which is its own, like how many filters are on that portrayal.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily an authentic search for identity, but it's what I had at the time. Growing up, I grew up in the 80s, so Sesame Street was my go-to. I didn't have like Blues Clues or anything like that. I just had Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers to help me through. And Marie and Luis on Sesame Street were my first touch points to like, oh, this is what a family, like a Mexican family, could look like. Mainly because I would only get glimpses of that when I'd go to my grandparents' house. Go to my grandparents' house. I can listen to Spanish and understand Spanish. If I try to speak Spanish, it's very basic Spanish, but I do have a native accent. So it can be like I spent enough time at my grandma's house to get the accent, right? Like that
Yeah.
that says enough there. But I couldn't, like, I'd come home and it's like a different house. So like seeing that in Sesame Street was kind of cool for me to be able to be like, oh, okay, well, that's what I could look like when I grow up, or like that's what my life could, I could live on a street where there's a big giant yellow bird and it would be fine. But
Big Bird's an
they were my,
ally.
yeah, yeah, really is. But they were my first like media portrayal that I can remember of identifying with someone in the Latino community. And then, growing up also in the 90s, there was the Selena movie, and there's a lot to do. Like, I have a lot to say about Selena, the movie Selena,
Yeah.
but Selena, the person. Um, I'd go to my grandma's house and there were pictures of Selena in the hallway, and was able to kind of put together this picture of like who I saw in the hallway, who I heard on the radio. And then that's when she came out with her English album. And it was kind of just like a moment for me to be like, oh, okay. And Selena's family is from where my dad's family is in Texas. So there was just, I really connected to her because I could kind of her, see me, her and me, or vice versa in that way. So yeah, those are a couple. And then, this is again aging me, but there was a movie called Stand and Deliver with Edward James Olmos. And I remember watching my dad watch that movie. And that was me being able to say, oh, that's how he sees himself. Like that's how he sees the world, type of thing. Cause my dad wasn't really open, still not very open with like emotions or things like that. So through his media choices, I was able to kind of get a sense of like his connection with things. So that's a little bit of samplings of growing up and how I connected to the culture.
I love hearing people's touchstones like that are relevant to them because also some things are like timeless. Um, as someone who grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, Louise and Maria on
Mm,
Sesame Street were still around. They were like also, we had VHS tapes that I would watch. So like I watched older stuff, but like just because it was like two different decades, that doesn't mean that they're not still relevant. Like kids these days, I assume still watch some Dora or Diego, like some of them at
mhm.
least. Whereas like that also started when I was really young. And then Selena, like I feel not shame because it's not fair to put that on younger me, but like I feel a lot of like sadness that I didn't get to meet Selena until I was like 13. And even then I didn't understand the weight of like how immensely important she was to Latino culture. And then like over the pandemic, I really started to do a lot more research about Selena because
Mm,
the show came out and there were a
mhm.
lot of like people had a lot of complaints about the show, but it's also like her family telling that story. So I wanted to like do my own research and learn more about it. And like I really like fell into Selena deep rabbit hole. Like a lot of more Selena songs were in my rotation because my family is Brazilian, so we didn't really like. My parents knew Selena, but a lot of the musical touch tones in
Yeah.
my upbringing weren't like Mexican or Central American Latine music. It was more like Brazilian samba, so that was my research, and now I'm a big Selena fan. I watched the J Lo movie in theaters when
Mm,
it was out in October. So it's really cool to see, like, hopefully we continue to like use these touch points as educational resources for the future generations. But you're not the first person to mention Stand and Deliver on this podcast. I believe Lyrsa also mentioned that movie when she was here. So it's really cool. And then, do you feel like there are any great modern pieces of media that you wish you had when you were younger in terms of like
Mm.
these Latine shows, movies, even like, I don't know, a podcast as a podcaster?
Yeah, I mean, like I had the opportunity to cover A League of Their Own for post-show recaps, and there were two characters in there that I really wish that I had around when I was growing up, Lupe and Este. Lupe was kind of like that older daughter character that I could really kind of relate to from my own life experience. And then Este was just this young kid who's like just coming here to try and take it all in. And there was a lot of conversations around like responsibility and like taking care of your family back at home and things like that. That was a really, I mean, granted, it's a show paced in a different time. But it is a modern take on that story, and I enjoyed that portrayal most recently.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. I still need to check out the show. I remember seeing over the summer. The summer was a really hectic time for me just because I was starting a new job, and at the summer season in this tourist attraction that I work in, it was booming.
Yeah.
So there's like I have a massive list of like shows from 2022 that I need to like still hit. Like Our Flag Means Death is another one that I really want to hit.
Mm.
Like, but I hit the big ones. I got Severance. I got like I got Better Call Saul, of course. But um, so speaking of portrayals in the media, what are some of the most frustrating or harmful stereotypes that you see, or like portrayals of Latine people? And like, do you have any particular like grievances that you want to air
Mm.
right now about how the industry can portray our people and our culture?
I think there's an interesting conversation going around in mainstream culture and in Latina culture around machismo and just like toxic masculinity as a whole. And I think a lot of times portrayals of men that we see can have a lot of that machismo around it. Like, I have to do all these things. I have to take care of the family. I don't have time for this. You know, I don't know. I can't really like put it into words, but you know when you see it, machismo.
Yep.
Um, so that I would like to see that unpacked a little bit more because, and I'd like to see the intersection between like what is machismo and immigration do to a person? How does that impact their character? How does that impact their identity? Because again, the only frame of reference I have really is my dad. And when he came to this country, he like forgot Mexico, like peace out Mexico. I don't want anything to do with that. And even when it became available to like have dual citizenship, it's like not something he's generally interested in. He's all like on the America side, which is I understand. I understand why he's the oldest child in the family, has to learn the way to help people assimilate all of that stuff. Um, but I have a feeling some machismo played into that, and it like what did he lose in this situation? And I think there's an opportunity for that type of conversation um, through the stories that we tell.
Yeah, I would love to continue to see this being a discussion that the storytellers in this industry have. Like one of the biggest uh, pursuits of more representation, from my understanding, is not just on screen, but also behind the scenes. And I think
Yes,
having more people who can resonate with this kind of storytelling is important to tell these stories, because there's a way to tell the story, and then there's a way to like glorify or like kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like
like virtue
minimize the like
signal.
storytelling ability. So I think that like this is definitely a story that I think should be explored. And then, however, I also think that it is a nuanced story, that there's like a lot
Oh,
of layers, that if you have like all these like white guys writing in a writer's room with like one person of color, it's not gonna pass the what do we have a Latine test? Like, you know how there's like the Bechtel
We
test?
don't
Like, we
have the
should have
Bechdel
one.
test for Latinos. It would
Yeah.
be like, I don't know what
The
we'd
Rita
call it.
Moreno test.
Yeah.
Which
How many
I
Ritas are
love her so much. Like, I'm so glad she's in this new 80 for Brady movie. I was actually listening to the podcast earlier today. And I was thinking, oh, if only we were doing that podcast that we did for the patron feed about based on a true story, because that would bring up 80 for
there?
Brady. But did you
Well,
ever see
and
One Day at a Time?
I was gonna say One Day at a
Yeah.
Time is a great portrayal. It was
Yeah.
so great to see that show reimagined for our community and see
Yeah.
it talk about and explore things like immigration, sexual identity, gender identity, and then have Rita Moreno be the abuelita in the situation and like try to change with the times, take it all in type of thing.
Yeah.
It was really cool. I'm sad
And
it
you
got
mentioned
canceled.
I'm so upset. Like, I support Gloria Calderon Kellett in everything she does,
Mm.
and I just hope one day they can like finish telling the stories they had because, it's a long shot. But I love that show so much. It like multiple characters remind me of family members, even though I'm Brazilian and not Cuban. It still like hits the same like emotional core that we need. You mentioned intersectionality earlier, and
Mhm.
like the being like both an immigrant and being Latino and being like a man, but like there's like so much intersectionality that I think comes with being Latine, and one of them is like the intersectionality of being like white and Latine, or for me like being bisexual and Latine and other stuff.
Mhm.
So like, do you have any? I mean, as a Latino woman, do you have any thoughts on how we can tell like more intersectional stories for communities
Mhm.
that you might fall under?
So, just from my own experience with having my dad's side be Mexican and my mom's side be Polish, I will never forget that like a polka is the same type of music as a ranchera. And so like there is commonality between different cultures. And so
Yeah,
if you could find a place where that is the common denominator, you can set the stage to tell stories that explore intersectionality. I think Chicago is a great is a great setting for something like that, mainly because we have large immigrant. I mean, every main city does, but there's also gentrified. That story of the show that was also unfortunately canceled, and that's something like our
oh
stories need to stop being canceled. Um, but like through gentrification, you can kind of unfortunately get to intersectionality because it deals with so many different topics.
yeah. I think it is also like there's a lot of stories to tell. You can combine stories like and talk about the impacts of gentrification on different minority groups, and also
Yep.
like another thing that I actually am very passionate about is seeing more Afro Latina stories,
Yes.
because a lot of times Hollywood will pick the safe ones, quote unquote, like they're ones with the white passing Latine people. Whereas I remember this was like a big discussion around In the Heights, and like I love that movie,
Mm.
but it could have like also been a little like even with just like some more background extras that were like both like from Latino and also like Afro Latino. So I think that's like another really important piece. And I'm surprised it's been, I don't know, 10, 11 episodes of this series, and we haven't discussed gentrification and Hank Defied yet on this podcast series. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, yeah, and even just this year, I think it's this year in the census, they're having Latino be like a race you can choose. Now that's
Okay.
like a whole conversation, right? Because we just talked about like the spectrum of Latino people that we have, right? Like there's skin color spectrum, there's sexuality spectrum, there's gender spectrum. There's so much of a spectrum here, and so the question is like I would proudly, check that box because I could never, whenever I would like take a standardized test, I could never choose Caucasian because it would be Caucasian non-Hispanic. Well, guess
Yeah.
what? I am Hispanic. So then I would, have to choose Hispanic. So in this case, which I am, I just couldn't choose both things. You could only be one thing. And so, that I think, as much as I think being able to choose something like Latini on a census will help us get resources that we need for our communities and things like that. We can't be put in that one box. like
Yeah.
that. And that's true for many communities. I mean, the Hispanic community as a culture, just the word Hispanic means you were conquered by Spain, right? Like, so you have that experience in common. And then if you fold in living in America on top of it, there's just such a diversity of stories and identities to explore.
Yeah, no, and even today, like I told you before we got on the call, that I went to Central Casting to do some
Yeah.
background. Like I finally got in the registration line, and I had to go do some forms, take some headshots. But I like one of the papers was like, "What are you?" But then also on the online application, it's like, "What roles are you potentially able to play?" And I'm like, I know, I use ethnic my the fact that people ask me what are you a lot, I use that as an advantage, and I'm trying to reclaim it. Like my opening joke in my stand-up set is about being ethnically ambiguous and people asking me
Mhm.
that. But I was like, I am Middle Eastern, I'm Latino, but I'm also white. The other day someone asked if I was Armenian, which I'm not, so I was like put me in however, as long as I feel comfortable playing these roles, because I am Middle Eastern, I am white, I am indigenous. It's just like a lot of different pockets of
Mhm.
like culture that like it can be very confusing, especially when you're a young kid filling out those like forms and like you're not really grasping what identity means in the same way that me, much older in life, I can grasp.
Yeah, it's like I think we're filling those forms out like in kindergarten.
Yep.
How do I know what that means? Like I don't know what that means. I remember going home and asking my parents, I was like, I checked the Hispanic box. Is that okay? Like, is that
I
who I am?
remember
Like,
doing
I
the
don't
thing.
know.
And for me, there's actually like the additional layer of like technically I am Hispanic because there were Spanish conquistadors in my ancestry tree, probably with
Mhm.
like that when they colonized the indigenous people of Brazil, or the Spanish and the Portuguese, mostly the Portuguese. But I do have Spanish ancestry if you trace it back, but I don't really identify as Hispanic. And that's like always a big thing because Brazil is part of Latin America, so it's Latine, but it
Mhm.
doesn't speak Spanish, so it's not necessarily considered Hispanic in the same way. So it's like sometimes they'll just have Hispanic listed. I mean, this was always like a mild gripe, and I never did anything, but now I've noticed it's fixed. But when I would check the Survivor wiki and like look at their category under Hispanic contestants, I was always like, Abby Maria, I don't think is Hispanic. I think
Mm.
she should be like in a different category. But and I noticed they have changed that in the recent years. I don't know when, because I never did anything about it. I just remember like being a little like not frustrated, but like it was just like something I noticed. And I'm glad that the conversations are evolving to include Brazil and Suriname and Guyana because they are part of Latin America. They just don't speak Spanish.
And I mean, we've been here for millions of years. Like, people have lived in Latin America for a very,
Yeah,
very, 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 very long time. And those cultures are still ingrained in the people we are today. And they aren't Hispanic.
yeah.
Like,
Uh,
they are indigenous to that place.
I 100% agree. And I wanted to actually ask you because you have very two different backgrounds in being Mexican and Polish,
Mhm.
which is rare because like you have like two parents that have different like stories in terms of like their cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Like, did you ever feel an internal clash about like maybe like letting one supersede the others, or like I'm sure you did because like everyone has identity crisis at different times, but did you ever like
Oh,
can you talk through that a little bit?
yeah, sure. So like I mentioned, the way that I wanted to, or like the only access I had to my culture was through uh media of all kinds, music, TV, videos, movies. And I always felt kind of weird if I was watching them like in front of my mom. Like my mom knows that my dad speaks Spanish and like my dad's side of the family is Spanish, but it wasn't like a shared experience. I was really big on like shared experiences with media. So I would always just like listen in my room or like hide off. But the thing that's really interesting is I didn't have the same, and I still don't necessarily have the same passion to listen to Polish music. Not saying that anything like I'm sure there's some really great Polish music out there, but I think that like that speaks to the fact that I kind of know what the white experience is like because I live in a system that was made for white people. So
Mhm.
I know what that is. And I don't know that much about, the other side of my heritage. So I lean more into figuring that out as opposed to the Polish side of me. And I do remember like I in high school played French horn and like my Polish grandfather said to me like you can't play that in a mariachi band. And I was like, I'm not going to be joining a mariachi band. So like even like if I wasn't doing it, it was something that was just like around me. Even though like the families like got along, like we couldn't
Yeah.
like become one family because of that. And I was always aware of it because I was kind of like straddling in the middle.
Yeah.
I was the first granddaughter on both sides. Still, I'm the first granddaughter on both sides. So I felt like a responsibility to like try and mesh the two families together. And then that just came to a point where I was like, well, you're adults. Like
Yeah.
you do you.
Yeah. Yeah. I am sorry that you had to struggle with that, especially like when you're growing up, when you already are trying to figure out your place in the world, to like have to feel like you're straddling two different sides of your family, and like there you might have to walk on eggshells surrounding like, am I too white for my Mexican grandparents?
Yeah.
Am I too Latina for my Polish grandparents? Like that must be very hard and exhausting. So
Oh,
I
thank you.
but I also do want to meet Multiverse Marissa, where she is in a mariachi band.
That would be fun. I mean, like
Yeah,
I would like it.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, and French horns could totally be in a mariachi band. Like also
yeah,
like that's a whole thing. Like there's female mariachis now, and I was like, holy, like there's a whole world. See, I still get excited to try and find
yeah.
things.
And that's like also something about like Latina culture. You talked about the machismo, but like I'm excited seeing like the doors being broken down, the glass ceilings being shattered in like smaller Latina spaces like mariachi bands, and other like historically masculine activities in these cultures and customs. So it's something that I look forward to seeing more of, and hopefully it just comes soon rather than later.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so I know you watch Survivor because you mentioned it on a couple of podcasts. I don't know your
Mhm.
history with reality TV, but I know you're mostly focused on the scripted side. But are there any
Mm.
examples of like reality experiences with Latina culture, or like
Mm.
whether it's positive or negative, that you wanted to highlight? And like do you watch any other reality shows besides Survivor?
Survivor's my main one. I did watch some
Okay.
Love is Blind.
Okay.
Like, if you want to count that as reality TV or
I don't
not
think
is
it's
up to you.
probably healthy. It's probably not a healthy reflection of
No,
Latina people on that if they are
of
on that
people
show.
in
Of
general.
people, of
I
people.
just
Yes.
I just think it's its own
Yeah.
thing. Um, but I'm always intrigued by like the experiments part of it.
Yeah.
In terms, I watch Amazing Race from time to time.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll
Well, that
watch.
they go to Mexico every once in a while, so
They
like that might be like fun for you.
I my sister and I do talk about going to on the Amazing Race and going to Mexico. I have not been to Mexico either, so
Ooh.
that's something on my to do list for sure.
But I'm assuming you want to do like the more culturally like cultural exploration, not just like go to Cabo for a week, which I mean
Oh,
sounds nice, but you probably want to like
sounds
learn about
great.
it.
But no, like if I want to go to a resort, I'm fortunate enough to live in a place where there's many choices.
Yeah.
But I would like to go see, where my family's from and then go to Mexico City and that's one thing that my dad brought up too, like when he went to Puerto Vallarta for work, which is just weird, but he went there and he's like, it's such like a bubble situation where there's the resort and then you like turn. He's like, I went for a walk. Everyone else was staying in the resort, but he wanted to go explore. And there's just so much poverty around it. And so I said, if I go to Mexico, I won't put my money there. I
Yeah.
will put my money in other places. And I think, that's a larger conversation that everyone's having around tourism and whether, it's a good thing or a bad thing. But it affects
White Lotus
people.
season 4, Puerto Vallarta.
Yes. Yes. I'll go. I'll be there.
Yeah. there's also like such a interesting conversation because I know it's also like a very like big spot for gay men specifically. Like they love
Yeah.
going there. So I think that's like an interesting conversation about like tourism and specifically like the tourism industry in Mexico and in like these Caribbean islands as well, like where a lot of people go for like these big bashes and then leave. And then, like you said, the people around are the ones more impacted by the tourism department and the industry there. I wanted to ask you also, did you like ever like what would you like to see moving forward in terms of like stories? You mentioned machismo, but is there anything like about
Mm.
like that is it could be something small, it could be another big topic, or like uh maybe like more
I would,
uh
yeah. I would like to see like stories start out where someone isn't a janitor or a cleaning person in general. Not saying that those people don't have stories to tell, but there's like we've talked about the diversity of people and experiences to choose from. I would also love to see, because I think this is another topic that can be kind of brushed aside within the community, is see more LGBTQIA stories for the community, because I think there's just so much. We need that in general, but within the Latina community, we could really have a really good healing moment,
yeah,
I think,
because there's like
if
a
we
lot of like
if we did that.
Catholicism in like Latin
Yes.
cultures that like when religion and queerness sometimes don't like intersect well, like in terms of like family stories. But that's why when you mentioned Brita Moreno and One Day at a Time, that was like super empowering to see like there are people out there that like are accepting, but like also it is a big thing and it also falls back under the machismo category of like how does queerness affect that. So that's why also it's disappointing to see a lot of these queer Latina shows end up getting canceled. Like I worked on Promised Land, which had a one
Yeah.
season run on Hulu. You can't even find it on Hulu anymore. You have to buy it on iTunes. Hulu striked
Oh,
it, which is so disappointing because I would just like it was a comfort show. I watched it like just on loop because it was like oh it was like really good. I thought like and I know I'm biased, but I had a great time working on it and I had a great time watching it. But there was multiple queer characters in it. And it was just like okay, that's another queer Latina show that was unceremoniously like axed. And
yeah,
it's like
and
a formula that people would like because it's basically Latino Succession, but
mm,
it just wasn't given a chance.
well, I wish I because it was on ABC, right?
It
Like,
was on ABC for the first 5 episodes, but it was going up against the Olympics and at 10 p.m. on Mondays after The Bachelor. So I think it had an
uh,
uphill climb to start. And then
yeah,
it
but
got
they had a
pushed to
choice in
Hulu for
that
the second
too.
half. Yeah.
Like, set us up for success, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
Um, are there any like
I think
big oh go ahead, go ahead, sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, I think one of the things that want to make sure is that we have more stories, because the otherwise our stories get told by like mainstream media. So then
Yeah.
otherwise the only net narrative that's out there is um people come over the border. Nobody
Yeah.
knows what that means. Like, and so if we fine, tell that story. Tell a true story of what it means to come to America. Tell a true story of why people are leaving to you know, leaving places to come here, and explore that story so that people have a more holistic view of the immigrant experience, and not just necessarily the immigrant experience of like 2 generations removed once we're here, because I think those stories are also important. But when it comes to changing the landscape that we're living in, we need to have more stories that educate people on our experience, I think,
Mhm.
as much as it is important for us to see ourselves reflected in those stories as well.
Yeah. Um, I I agree very much about that. Like it's important that we tell our own stories. Otherwise, there are often generalized or stereotypes,
Mhm.
and there's not a lot of nuance given to those characters, and a lot of these characters end up being more two dimensional than their white counterparts. Um, so that's something very important. That's something I am aspiring to do. Like one of my like goals in terms of whatever I do with my career is to empower more diverse storytelling, especially like geared towards younger generations, because I think it's important to start with like empathy and compassion for all people at a young age. Otherwise, like they have to do a lot more unlearning, and it's easier to just learn something once. So when I
Yes.
really wanted to work in kids media, which I'm still open to, I just really don't know what I want to do with my life right now. um, that's something that I've always had as a goal. Um, in terms of like some people out there doing the thing, whether it's like actors, writers, directors,
Mm.
or other like people in the industry, do you have any people that really stand out to you that you really admire for their work in telling Latine stories or in the projects that they do?
I think, anytime America Ferrera does something, I kind
Love
of pay
her.
attention.
Yeah.
I remember she came onto the scene in what was the name of that movie that I just wrote down?
Real women have curves, right?
Yes, Real Women Have
Yeah.
Curves. And she did that intentionally. Like that was
Yeah.
and she's carried that through pretty much everything, even in Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. Like she's like, representing in
Yeah.
in
Even
that
her Disney Channel
story as
movie, Gotta
well.
Kick It Up. Like that's a
Yeah.
Latina story. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, not necessarily in the picture she's choosing these days, but Selma Hayek is now talking more about her experience,
Yep.
which is cool to hear as someone who's been in the industry for as long as she has and things like that.
Wait, so you're
There are
saying Magic Mike is not a Latina
yeah,
story?
I mean, some ladies lived it. It could have been us. but I mean she's speaking more in Spanish in PR things and things like
Mhm.
that, and that to me I don't necessarily see her as like someone doing the thing, but it's kind of like the comfort level of her is like the barometer of how much she feels surrounded and comfortable enough to talk like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then like I'm really sad that but Los Spookies, like
That's
why?
so
Why no
yeah.
more? but, like,
I
but
mean,
it
there's
was
probably a
so
lot of reasons that we can talk about off air. Just I don't want to get but
yeah,
yeah.
but it was so cool to see like that and Encanto. I mean, there's so much like
Oh, I love
magical
Encanto. Yeah.
realism like in our cultures that using it as a vehicle to like explore things like generational trauma or like just the human experience, I think would be really, really cool to see. And so
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I have my eyes on any particular person, but I am trying to see more of these type of projects
Yeah.
pop up into the zeitgeist because I will like Encanto. It it had some sort of generational trauma tie into me. Like I could not stop crying, and I cried in
Yeah.
Coco too. Like Coco is its own thing, but like
Yeah.
Encanto, like really hit a lot of the cultural generational things that I
I felt
experienced.
it. Yeah. It
Yeah.
was just like, why are you attacking me like so personally with this movie? Like I love it, but I hate it at the same time.
Like every song, I was like, "Geez, Louise, okay,
Yeah.
all right."
Um, no, I would love to see more animated like musicals like for kids. Like Coco, you mentioned Encanto. I also love Vivo on Netflix, which was
Oh
super
yeah,
fun. I had a
yeah,
great time watching. Like Lin Manuel Miranda, you can keep making these movies for me, and I will eat them up. Like I love these stories, especially like for kids to celebrate their culture with like fun, vibrant songs. Like the fact that we don't talk about Bruno is like the biggest Disney song makes me so happy because that's like a Latino guy did that.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think if I remember my Spotify Wrapped, it was mainly Encanto.
there was a lot of Encanto on mine, like Dos Oruguitas was up there too, not just, like
Hmm.
all the whole soundtrack. And I really wanted to go see it at the Hollywood Bowl. I know it's on Disney
Oh
Plus now, but I really wanted to go. But I didn't want to go to a concert alone. I don't like going to concerts alone because I'm like, I want to vibe with someone. I want to like have
yeah,
fun and like
share
if
the
I'm
experience.
around natures. But um, in terms of you mentioned something. Oh, the magical realism with Latine stories. I think that's super fascinating and something that hasn't been super tapped into as well. Like in Brazilian culture, there was this show called Invisible City that my mom really likes on
Mm.
Netflix, but it's based off like Brazilian folklore characters. Kuka, you might have seen memes of her. She blew up on like the meme circuit like 6 years ago. She's like the little drag queen crocodile, as I call her. But
Oh,
like she is she is like a big character in Brazilian folklore, and I mean, we don't need more La Llorona movies, but like there are like these stories that uh, these tales that Latine parents tell their kids, or that are part of their identity, that I would love to see like more takes on in American media, and more learning from these stories that you can like tell creative and innovative ways to share these stories to mainstream audiences.
yeah. I mean, it's we tell other stories. Why can't we tell ours?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm excited to see what happens, but it's also like frustrating how slowly we end up making progress. Um, uh, and like just to go back to Selma Hayek speaking in Spanish, because this is something I wrote down that I didn't mention. But one
Mhm.
of my small little serotonin boosts that I've been doing lately is watching actors speak in their native languages. Like,
Mm.
like there's like some YouTube compilations of like Latine actors speaking in Spanish or Portuguese, and like sometimes they're just so fun in like interviews. I know there were like clips of Lupita Nyong'o doing that
Yeah,
were kind of going around with her and Tinoch Huerta when they were promoting Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and I was like, that's so cool to me. Um,
he's doing the thing. He's doing the
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
and like that is something else that like I think that Black Panther Wakanda Forever was like an incredible piece of media for like talking about like the intersectionality of like being indigenous and being like colonized, and like with Namora's story. That is like something that I hope people look at and be like, oh, this is like interesting. And I think Namor had a point. He just went about it the wrong way.
I think it's interesting because our stories again can be cast across a diverse group of people, but I think like the main common denominator is we know what it's like to live under whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can come together and tell those stories, we can tell everybody's story in that way. Even like white stories can all be told under this umbrella of current systems, things like that. I don't know. I just was thinking about because also I am sure you've talked about in the but like the divide between the Afro community and the Latino community, and how sometimes we could be on the same team if we just like
Yeah,
talk about it.
yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's oftentimes like some people like just like jump into things without really taking a step back and overlooking. And I feel like more respectful conversations about shared experiences, because there are a lot of like similarities. Obviously, not it's not like how we started this podcast. You and I have a lot of similar experiences, but we're not the same people. We have individual
Right.
stories, and that's like the same thing with like these like big like historical stories of our people. Like we have similarities, we have differences, but like at the end of the day, we just want to have the same level of respect and like the same treatment as our white peers. When
Yeah,
at the end
and
of the day,
there's room for
yeah,
all of the stories, even though we can be told that there's not, even though we can tell ourselves that there's not, even if it's just telling a story to a friend, that's a start. That's a
yeah.
start into getting the story out there.
And one of the big reasons, not to steal from Mediapedia, is capitalism.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, I mean, like that's the thing though. Like you have to see, like we have to support with our money and
Yeah,
our attention, and we have to play the game of the system that we're in. And
yeah.
so that's why like anything like I might not even be watching it like attentively, but I will sometimes just have
Oh,
something on
I
so
will
that
put
they're
stuff
getting the
on mute
rating.
while I go to bed just to give like the extra click.
Yeah.
When maybe they
Yeah.
like see that it's on mute, but I'm like, I'm in bed, but I need it to get renewed because I feel guilty if it doesn't get renewed, that I didn't do my part. And like I show up opening weekend for a lot of the big stories that like are about people of color. Like I remember there, like not just like the big stuff, but like also the smaller stuff with opening like everything everywhere all at once, which isn't like a
Yeah.
Latina story, but I was there opening weekend. And I was just like, okay, we're gonna show up, and we also show up for our peers that are in different communities as well. Like I think that's important because we can't be asking them to show up for us if we don't show up for them. And I
Right.
think everyone's stories should be told also for your own learning experience. Like without some of the stories I've experienced, I wouldn't know as much as I do about like the difficulties of like certain communities, like especially like And Big Brother Canada, I've been watching, and like they do a really good job of talking about Indigenous representation, especially in the last few years, and being like First Nation. And I think that's like
Mhm.
something that, like, even watching global stories, not just American centric ones, are important to have a foundation of understanding where we all come from and all the different struggles that people can go through because of their backgrounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Watch a movie in a different language. See what you can relate to. Things like that. Like that was a big thing I did in college, but
Yeah.
even within Netflix, sometimes I'll watch Korean shows, sometimes I'll put on a Spanish show. Sometimes it's just a way for me to remind myself that the world is smaller than I think it is. It's a big world, but it's
Yeah.
also much smaller than I think it is, and we're all connected in some way. I always go back to ev- every like major religion or culture has like the flood story baked into it.
Mhm.
Like there's Noah and the flood, but then there's also Gilgamesh had a flood. And then, like, so
Yeah.
we were all here
Yeah.
when this big flood happened, and we all told stories to try and figure out what the flood means, try to rationalize that. And those are the differences we can be celebrating as we're going through this communal experience called life.
Yeah, celebrate each other because you have one life to live and it's more fun to be around people that you can learn from. I think it's more fun to
Yeah.
be
And
around
so,
different cultures and learning different cultures. Like I love trying different foods, and that's like one of the big things. Like a culture is shared through food oftentimes.
mhm. Yeah,
Um,
and have the difficult conversations.
mhm.
Don't be like that's part of the work too. Not only do we need to show up for each other under capitalism, but we have to also show up for each other emotionally and have the conversations and answer the questions and ask the questions that need to be asked.
100%. Now, Marissa, is there anything that you have in mind that you want to share that we haven't hit? Any other thoughts?
Mm.
Um, And I'm sure if you're like, "Oh, I don't have any now," but then, like, as soon as we hang up, you're like, "I wrote down I have this, 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 this."
Oh, I just was reviewing my notes. I think, you know, I think the only thing I would say is your point about who's telling the story, I think is really important. And it's a good reminder that even if I see a Latina story, to look to see who's telling it,
Yeah,
because that will be the filter in which the story is being told. And
yeah,
so, you know, as much as I look to media, which is it's a dangerous position for me to be in, right? Like I
yeah,
am getting my cultural identity through the filter of a writer, a producer, an editor. You know what I mean? Like all of these different filters. I'm trying to search for something. So talk to people about what you're viewing. Do the research in terms of who's making the stories, and do your like in a good way, do your own research. Like, you
yeah.
know, like find out, go to the library. And that, like, this is a pep talk to myself. Like, don't just take everything for face value.
I
But
And you can always continue to learn, like, via the media. Like, even myself, like, I didn't realize that there were still, like, stories on Survivor that could impact me the way, like, I thought there was, like, no way a modern Survivor season could make me feel as emotionally invested as, like, when I first got into the show. But this last season, like, just two random people living their lives playing this show, and Jesse and Carla made me feel so culturally empowered, and, like, gave me, like, representation that I didn't even know that I needed at that point. Like,
I
just
know.
I was like, oh my god, like hearing them talk about themselves, and like just brought me back to like when I was younger and I didn't really have a ton of like Latino people to look up onto on TV. Like, besides the Sesame Street people, it was like George Lopez show, and then the Wizards of Waverly Place,
Mhm.
which didn't even have a full Latina cast in their
Mhm.
roster. Same with George Lopez, but uh, just to see like these two people like succeeding and thriving on this show was so exciting, and it was just super rewarding of an experience. And at the end of the day, spoilers, they didn't win, but I still think they came away like being what I will take away from the season.
Yeah, they won my heart, that's for sure. They
Yep.
showed up, you know, full as a full human in that situation and didn't have to censor themselves. And
And they
that
were
was cool.
authentically Latino, and which was super
Yeah.
cool. Like one of the
Yeah.
episode titles I think was like watching a telenovela or something. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's iconic behavior from Carla and Jesse. And also Gio was on the season too, and he told a lot of good stories, but like he just went out much earlier, so we didn't get to see as much of his story as we got to see with Jesse and Carla. So I'm excited about them and like the fact that I got to experience that. Especially when I was probably on the lowest point of my Survivor fandom, right before the season started. I didn't even know if I was going to watch the
Mm.
season, and then I put the first episode on. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep going through it, and then I was invested, and now I'm like back in it, like almost like that was the most exciting season to me in years, just because of like the personal connection I developed with these two people.
Yeah, it makes a big difference when you can see yourself reflected.
Yeah. Anyways, Marissa, do you want to start winding this down?
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't have I went through my notes. I think we covered everything.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
we
the
had a
only other shout out I would put, there is one more. Zaleda on For All Mankind. Her
okay.
story is really good if you're looking
Yeah.
for a science immigrant NASA space story of a Latina
Yeah.
woman.
Also, one other thing that I have an example that like is relevant because you're on the podcast, but in one of the last episodes of This Is Us, we saw the Miguel
Mm,
flashback, and
yeah.
one of my favorite things that they did was when they had Miguel go into his job interview with David
Mhm.
DeLuise from Wizards of Waverly Place. um, he got interviewed as Michael because he sent two resumes in, and that always stuck with me since that episode aired, and I was really excited about that the show doing something like that. Also, the show supports one day at a time, so we also love that part of This Is Us. Um,
Yes.
when
Yes.
they shouted out, so like that was something, and I wanted to bring that up while you were here that I thought of just now, because you covered
That
This Is
was
Us.
yes, I did. But that was interesting because that one episode was like the most Latina story we
Yeah,
got out of the whole thing. But
and
it
Miguel was
did
there since
it
episode 1 or 2.
yeah. 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 He was there the whole time.
Yeah.
But what we got in that episode was really good.
Yeah. Anyways, Marissa, tell everyone what
Yeah.
you're up to. And also, I like to ask
Wow.
people for a pop culture plug of something they are not covering. And for this series, I'd like
Mhm.
people to give me at least one thing that is Latine, but you can also shout something else out that might not be.
Oh,
Also, this is something I'm going to add this year. If you have any Latine dishes that you recommend people, like in terms
oh.
of food, let's expand people's palates.
Hmm.
And
Okay. All right. So I guess my recommendation would be For All Mankind.
okay.
If it's something that I'm not covering, it's not 100% a Latina story, but there is a Latina storyline in it.
Yeah.
It's very relatable. It's very good. Um, it deals a lot with like immigration, but also like a woman being good at math. Like there's like a whole bunch of things it touches on in there. In
Edward
terms of
James
what,
almost would be proud.
yeah, he really would. um, when it comes to what I'm covering, I am on poster recaps these days talking about you.
Me?
You.
That joke gets me every time.
I don't know how else to say it. Yeah. Talking about you, the show on Netflix, with Latanya Starks. And we are in the start of season 4 coverage. Just if you're not familiar with the show You, it's actually split into two parts of the season. So we're doing our first part coverage and our second part coverage. So you can hear me there. I also just wrapped up coverage of National Treasure Edge of History, which it is very Latina centered. They talk about a lot of things, but maybe not in the best cohesive
Oh
way.
no.
So I'm just telling you, like, if you want to hear things like Mexicans were there in Texas before America, like, because we don't really talk about that often. That is a space for that, but the story itself could be better. That's all I'm just gonna say
Yeah.
about that.
But listen, if we're
Um,
gonna we want representation, we have to take the misses
it's
sometimes
true,
too.
yeah, and they actually like they put a lot of facts in there. They talked a lot about our history, but then also the main character is a DACA kid.
Okay.
And so you got to hear a little bit about her experience and how she always had a bag packed and that kind of thing. So they put the pieces were there.
Yeah.
It's just could have been a little bit better. But please do watch it for the or at least have it on for the
Yep.
signal of hey, our stories matter. And then I'm covering Dear Edward as well, which is a story about grief on Apple Plus. So if you're interested in hearing about anything else I'm covering, you can follow me on Twitter at Marsbars,
Great handle.
MARZBARS. Thank you.
Great handle. I'm a big fan. Every time you say, I was like, that was inspired.
Thank you. And then in terms of like expanding the palate, the first thing that came to mind is actually like not very flavorful. But it's pretty it's just a sugar tortilla. So it's
Love
like
it.
something in my family that like we have after every meal or have with breakfast and coffee. You just make like a regular tortilla, but you put sugar in it basically.
Hmm.
And it's a little bit thicker, but it hits the spot, and it's like the little hug that I need. That or tamales, but tamales are like
Yeah.
tamales are their own. Everybody should know about tamales.
Yes.
Um, but sugar tortilla is a Garza family staple. So I
Yeah.
just will plug those.
One last question, because I know
Yeah.
you got around, but like, did your family ever do like blending food cultures between the Polish food
Mm.
and the Mexican food? Like, did they ever like? Did you ever have any like Garza family recipes where they like were like, let's take part of this dish and combine it?
No, but I kinda do wanna make like a Mexican pierogi now. It's like
Ooh,
pierogies and empanadas are
they're
almost the same,
yeah.
but not really. Like one's
It's
boiled,
like
one's
noodles
not.
and
Yeah,
pasta. Like it's like everyone comes to their own conclusions eventually. It's just different parts of
yeah.
the world.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Yeah.
like every culture. I used to have a blog called One World, One Plate, and the tagline was "Every culture has a tortilla," because every culture does have a tortilla. And
Yep.
so I'm really into finding those commonalities, or like every culture has a hot pocket. Like there's some similarities somewhere. But yeah, the family in terms of my family experience, we didn't blend them as much as we could have, or can. We still can. So
Yeah.
thanks for
There's
the
still
idea.
opportunity.
There's
Yeah.
still
No.
time.
The first post-show recap thing that we're both at, well, I'll bring you
Yes.
something Brazilian, and then you can bring me
Yes.
something Polish and Mexican
You got it.
combined. All right. Thank you so much for doing this, Marissa. I had a
Oh,
great time, and I'm excited for people to check this conversation out.
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And here's to telling more stories of ours.
Here, here.